In many ways, it marks the museum's centenary. In celebration of this momentous occasion, we invited Sahej Rahal, a contemporary artist, to exhibit his works at the JNF Gallery. It also marks a first for the JNF, inasmuch as we have invited an Indian contemporary artist whose works do not form part of our collection to exhibit at the gallery. This exhibition has helped expand the scope of the JNF to create dialogue around contemporary art. Jahangir Nicholson was encouraging of young contemporary artists and diverse practices of art. As a result, the JNF collection comprises a vast collection of art in several mediums: paintings, sculptures, prints, photographs, works on textile, to name a few. In Ancestors, it is interesting to see an artist who incorporates such a diversity of medium: sculpture, painting, drawing, and even new technologies like the artificial intelligence program projection. And all of these have been on display at our gallery. If one was to think of it, the installation of the gallery transforms the space as an archaeological site of the future, thereby provoking thoughts around the present. Sahej's works resonate with the underpinnings of the museum in telling stories of civilizations. Nicholson spent his final years negotiating with the city authorities for a space to build a museum dedicated to contemporary art. In 2008, Cyrus and I, as executors of Nicholson's estate, entered into an arrangement with the CSMVS to establish the Jahangir Nicholson Gallery within the hallowed walls of this great building. From its inception, the JNAF aimed to be a platform for modern and contemporary art and culture in the city through our many exhibitions, programs, and outreach. In this endeavor, we are committed to building new research on art through catalogs around our exhibitions, as well as connecting to our diverse audiences through talks, workshops, activities, on-site and online. The catalog for this exhibition will also soon be released. I must thank the Shergill Sundaram Art Foundation for supporting the project through the installation grant awarded to Sahej Rahal. Cyrus and I thank Mr. Mukherjee, the Director General of the museum, without whose support and enthusiasm, the JNF would not stand as an important element of the city's art culture. And above all, we thank our dynamic team, comprising of Pooja, Ashika, Tamara, and Karthik, for selflessly devoting their time and efforts to put forward this wonderful exhibition. Pooja, could I request you take this event further?
Thank you so much, Kaivan. At JNF, I think we are really very lucky to have such an enabling and supportive board. Without being from an art background, both Kaivan and Cyrus have really built a platform for modern and contemporary art in the city. In fact, to pitch this show, I had made a presentation to our board. And while it's not something that we've done before, they wholeheartedly were very open and they wholeheartedly supported the idea. So many thanks again, Kaivan. I will now invite Vivan Sundaram to speak. Vivan needs no introduction, really. He's one of the most well-known artists in India. His practice is prolific, bold, and experimental. And I think his work is truly interdisciplinary with art, photography, video, design, and even fashion. He's done several collaborative experimental projects. Instead of going into a formal sort of introduction, which you can find on the internet, I wanted to share one episode. When I was an art student in the painting department in Baroda, Vivan had visited and invited all the students to together imagine the whole of the painting studios, which were huge, as a 3D sketchbook. And so we pasted through Vivan, we pasted paper all over the floors, the walls, the ceilings. We had pens hanging from the fans, which were making their own sort of drawings on the floor. So it was really sort of this place where everyone came together, all the students, we were drawing on the walls, overdrawing over other people's works, adding, erasing. So it was really this few days of intense kind of collaborative work, intense energy. And in the end, these works was all over the walls of the studio. So in the end, we could, Kaiwan said, if you want, you can just take a few scraps, you can tear off a bit and keep it. But in the end, we took all of that, and with Vivan, it was all burnt outside in the ground. And this actually happened straight after 2002, after the Gujarat riots. And I feel like this sort of, in a way, really encapsulates, Vivan's practice, which is so responsive to social, political events, to our current realities, and so collaborative, and something that is so bold in the way that he gets people together. So that's, for an intro, that's what I want to say about about Vivan. And also his recent show at KNMA in 2018, which was really, really interesting because it brought together different times from his practice, all the kind of different works that he's done. So that was also something that was really special to see. And recently, Vivan has also co-founded the Shergill Sundaram Art Foundation, which supports research and art projects. And it is through the SSAF, through which Sahej was granted the first installation art award that the Shergill Sundaram Art Foundation sort of launched. And I think through this award, and Vivan has really been a mentor to not only just as part of the SSAF, but I think way beyond that, he's been part of Sahej's practice, like really sort of guided him and mentored him for the conception of the works that are in the exhibition that we have on the gallery right now called Ancestors. So thank you, Vivan, so much for agreeing to do this. We're very, very keen to have you because you've been so much a part of all our talks with Sahej and I over the past 2 years that we've been talking about this exhibition. So thank you and welcome. And over to you, Vivan.
Thanks so much, Pooja. It's quite inspiring, your introduction. And what was most unexpected, that you were there in that, what was it, 50th year of Indian independence. And we had a 40-hour non-stop day and night thing workshop. And you described it so well, so graphically, that obviously it had a great impact on you. And I must say, even for me, to go back to my old institution and with very sympathetic teachers there, that they allowed me. And in fact, there was a flanked by the introduction with KG Subramaniam, Jyoti Bhatt, Mahendra Pandey, all my teachers all sat there and watched this, and how the students, just started with a bang. And then when I said, now you can go on and then draw over another person's drawing, they were a little hesitant, but it just went on and on and on. So thank you so much for making me feel young at this moment. And then I can join my youngster winner of the award, Sahej Rahel, who has been a pleasure to meet him and talk to him. And of course, since I have done more formal site-specific installations, like the huge one in the Victoria Memorial, and there was a big fat book on it. So I handed it over to him. He must have said, "Who is this teacher handing me, examples of what installation art is," and a whole tome of very fine theoretical articles. So as if I was going to really stifle his creativity. But we struggled, a bit here and there, and that's very nice because Sahej is both very intelligent and also, I must say, exceptionally open to ideas. And slowly, he would go here and there, and it's all started falling in place. The next big question, which he worked hard, because I said, you can't show it in a private gallery just because Mort is supporting you. He wanted to go to his home by some remote river, which was very dramatic, and conceived some ideas. But every time it was that it must be ideally in a public place. And so the CMSVS, I know because I've shown in the small side gallery. And I said, it's a very fine institution. And when he said that you're there and you're a curator there, and you're open to bring his work in. I said that couldn't be better, because that relationship with the museum and his work, could create a very fine synergy. And then, of course, in the Jahangir Nicholson Gallery, which I've also shown, it's a beautiful big space. But I said it's a white cube, and you have to do everything that you can to slightly subvert it. And I think that you helped him greatly control some of his chaos, but also kept some of that order in relationship to whatever dramatic things that he produced. Now, I've only seen many slides of this work. Unfortunately, I've not been well enough to travel. And I can only say that Sahaj is so productive and so energetic. And before you know, he's produced another work. And I was amazed. Thought I was keeping up. But when I finally saw, like some huge, figure in a very surrealist way, distorted, on one side, blocking the other works, I said, well, he knows what installation art is. He knows how to disrupt, and he knows how to then also from that create something which is quite exceptional. Of course, his journey was quite fine, because also what he spoke about and about going, I was suggesting that he go to the site, but finally, even he hadn't gone to the museum to see those works which he was quoting. So he went there and, in fact, quietly made some pictures. And I think many of the small objects came from the kind of vitrines that they have in that section. And then slowly they grew. And I'm amazed that he's able to handle small scale things like toys, and keep on making them grow and grow in multiple directions. And I think that the freedom that he got in the space, and I must say, I've always, I don't know much about you, but I've heard very good things about you. And I said, I'm sure if Pooja is there, she will be able to also hold your hand in a very gentle way and let you do things, but also bring some kind of, what shall I say, structure. I'm very engaged in or interested in having structure in my work. In fact, I have 2, 3 large site-specific installations, and I always find that there's a central spine to it. And whether it's a, a, a kind of trolley track in the Victoria Memorial, or in my big installation of garbage, which was a roadway where you had the Republic Day parade. So that spine, from that central spine, it kind of moves in different directions. And something of that in a very free way, I could see just from the visuals, that he had also, applied himself and uh, and helped by you to orchestrate the range of this work. And it's wonderful the way that you go and you could even trip over a work. And that's what Duchamp said. It's very important to trip over a work. And he did that kind of, maybe not a linguistic game, but a very physical one at one level. And his relationship to materiality is something that I am very, which is very central to my work. And he has taken that on, and in fact, using, ancient clay, and then from that, making those large pots, which are, traditional. And then from that, shifting, as I said, to toys, to then making very mad, wild sculptures. So I think that it's a great, shall I say, honor for SSAF, its first installation grant, for a person to have, pushed the boundary, and it signals to a new kind of, well, we've just announced, and another very, if I can bring in the Ange group from Assam, and they are also a very complex collective. So I think that from number 1 to number 2, we are moving well, and let's hope I survive to see more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vivan. It was really nice to hear from you about your involvement in the process. And I really wish you could have made it to see the exhibition. It's only on now for till the 8th, till this weekend. We've actually had amazing responses, which we'll share with you. But before I get into talking about also the exhibition, I thought maybe Sahej, if you want to jump in and say something.
Sure. Thank you, Pooja. So I'll try to keep this as brief as possible. But I just, first of all, really need to thank all the people who were literally responsible for this show to come together, and the success and the love and the great response that we've got for the show is like our collective triumph. And just very quickly, so I don't miss anyone. I'd like to thank Gayatri, Latika, Geeta Kapoor, Vivan, who walked me through this entire journey of 2 years through, and also Malavika, Saurav, Tamara, Karthik, Abbas, Himanshu, Andre, Prateek, Vipin, Meet, Mort and Tara, and you, Pooja. And also to the CSMVS, Mr. Mukherjee, Kevan, Cyrus, who've kind of opened the doors to this project. Yeah, thank you so much. And just in terms of how Vivan did speak, I mean, this project has sort of been possible because of literally 2 artists at the head of 2 institutions, Pooja, you and Vivan. The fact that we kind of encountered a literal plague and all sorts of shapes that the world was taking in the last 2 years, and it's still come together. I think the kind of sheer grit and impulse that both of you have kind of brought to the project is why it is what it is today. I'm deeply thankful. And Vivan, doubly so for you, because I'll be very honest, the pandemic literally broke me, on a mental, physical, even spiritual level. I was just shattered, and the one thing that kept me going was your voice, and just talking to you and just watching you smile on the other side of the screen was I just filled me with this feeling that I want your enthusiasm, and that's what kept this going. So thank you so much. You literally kept me together through this entire thing, and I'm deeply honored and privileged to have that encounter with you. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you so much for all those lovely compliments, and you're going to keep going very far. I think now you've already got recognition by different international biennales, so your footprint is in many places, and it will go on, and we'll be proud to see the SSAF symbol here and there. Okay.
Thank you, Vivan. Thanks. Yeah, with that, I'd just like to say that, may our tribe of artists, prosper, and and we find ourselves in new adventures. So thank you. Pooja, I'll hand over it to you now, and thanks.
Thanks so much, Sage. So I just wanted to speak a little bit about how we came to this, being at the JNAF. And as I said, we show mainly artists from our collection. We have a very vast collection of artists from the post-independence period, actually pre and post-independence period, right up to 2001. We have one of Vivan's works also. I think the most contemporary artist would probably be Jitish, that's there in our collection. We also have Anju, lots of Anju Rodia works. So it's a really vast collection of about 800 pieces, and there's a lot to show and a lot to do. But I think it was when we were thinking about the museum centenary, and Mr. Mukherjee, the Director General, was also saying that, can you think of some programs for the centenary itself? And when I was I think that really gave me the chance to think outside the box, also to think about how we could do a contemporary art show that would speak to the questions of the role and the existence of the museum itself. Of sort of working with these objects from the past, of sort of putting them together to create narratives, to put across facts or history. And I think Sahej's practice is something that I've followed since 2014 when I saw his work at the Kochi Biennale. I think it was one of the displays that was my absolute favorite. Like it stayed with me, it lingered on for, it was something that I thought about for way after the Biennale. And it was interesting because it had this whole array, it grew out of the site, was site specific. It had the sense of some very large scale sculptures as well as these tiny objects and toys, as Vivan was mentioning, which sort of seemed to come from like a whole collapse of different temporal realms, if you can say. In fact, this exhibition then sort of, so when I was thinking about who and how to sort of do this show that would speak to the principles of the museum, Sahej was one of the first artists that I actually thought about. It took me a couple of months, 2-3 months to really think it over before I really mustered the courage even to call Sahej and ask him to. And of course, Sahej was very excited about it. And first I was like, and that this is the time when the museum was closed. Museum was closed for 2 years during the lockdown, during the several lockdowns through the pandemic. But I think what that did also was that it gave us this, created this pause where we could really, go back and forth, think about what we should include in the exhibition. And Sahej is someone who's, it's a very dialogic practice. I think it really invites people, like what I was saying about Vivan, it's kind of collaborative in many ways. Like he just invites people to sort of come into his work and make their own sort of stories within it. So it's been a very fun experience, and I've learned a lot, I feel, because it made me kind of deep dive and learn about things, about read books about how time and civilizations and through archaeology, through ontology, how concepts of life and the world really come about. So yeah, I think it was very interesting. And over the 2 years, we figured that, of course, the main project would be the Inamgaon project, for which Sahej won the SSAF award. And also I was very keen to include the Kochi sculptures, which we got thanks to Mortimer Chatterjee and Tara Lal of Chatterjee and Lal Gallery. Unfortunately, Mortimer was also supposed to be part of this conversation, but he's also down with COVID now. So he's on the call, but he won't be able to speak much. But anyway, coming back to the exhibition, I think those were the sort of thoughts that went into it. One was the role of the museum and creating these stories. At the same time, it was also a question of our own existence on the planet. And I think this is a time that we've come closest to the idea of an apocalypse, and Sahej's work kind of brings together this vision of this artistic vision of something that is beyond humans, that the world is going to exist, how and what that would look like beyond humans. And what I find very interesting about his work also is that though many artists have worked with this idea of the post-apocalyptic kind of apocalyptic vision, his is not a deserted, barren landscape. It's littered, it's strewn with materiality, like Vivan was saying. It's strewn with objects, with toys, with things that have their own stories and speak about civilizations. It's also very interesting that it comes out of archaeology. And what I find very interesting is that, when we talk about this whole thing, binary of abstract and narrative, I feel like Sahej's work is like this hyper narrative. It's like an invitation to everybody to come and bring out more and more stories. And I think it relates really, really beautifully to the museum. And many of the comments that we've got from our visitors, from reactions from like a young visitor, actually a young 11-year-old visitor wrote in our book that it feels old and new at the same time. Which is something that was so that's something that we've been talking about and theorizing about, saying how it's prehistoric and post-human, and he just simply so I feel like there's the language and the visual that is so strong that sometimes it doesn't need to be like explained so much, which is why we took this very hard decision of not having any labels within the exhibition, because it was staged like a museum, like a life-size museum diorama. So you enter into this space and everything is part of this theater. So it's got a sense of real theater in it, actually. There's also a skeleton which needs to be addressed right in the center of the room. And of course, he builds it out of the story of Inamgaon, and you can read about it on our website from the curatorial notes, as well as the stories that Sahej himself has written. So, yeah, I think it's really sort of come together in a very beautiful way. And also it's some of his works, I feel the way that he uses material, it's not just about using lots of material like medium and getting into painting and using video, but I feel like he has a real sense of the inherent meaning within the medium itself. Like if he's using clay, it kind of brings to mind some of the of earth as the oldest moldable material available to humankind to kind of express creatively, or or functional objects like pots and things. And even in the artificial intelligence program, I feel like it lives on the very idea of intelligence itself, like the human machine intelligence. And even the way you use, the polyurethane foam, which is basically, like you explained, the kind of plastic that comes out of spray cans. You sort of maintain that real toxicity of the thing. You've painted it black. It looks like rippling tar in a way. So yeah, these are just some of the things I wanted to say about the exhibition. The rest, I mean, I hope some of you can see it. Otherwise, of course, it's on our website and you can read about it. And I just want to thank Sahej for doing this. Over the past 2 years, we've gone back and forth. We even went to the museum's collections. We were actually going to show some of the objects from their ancient history collection, some of the toys and the actual objects, also the Inamgaon burial pots, the child burial pots we were going to show. So we sort of really went back and forth. I think it gave us the time to think about all the sort of ideas that were there, that the world was going through, that we were going through, and to really figure out how, I think it's a very, very relevant show for this time, because this we see how history is constantly kind of reread, the past is constantly written, reread, reclaimed or claimed. And what Sahej's work does is to take all these very complex questions about our existence, about our beliefs, about things that we take for granted, but he brings it down to something that's really playful, because there's a lot of fiction, there's fact, there's fiction, there's science fiction, there are all of this, it looks like an ethnographic display, but when you look closely, it's also things that are part of our current reality. And of course, it's like we've said before, it's like staging the future. So I think it does that in a very, very playful way. While doing the exhibition, we had a lot of fun as well, because we sort of put things together the way we wanted. Like he was very free with, he was like, yeah, you can just, we had these shrines that we called shrines, like there were vitrines, 4 vitrines that we used for 4 of his paintings. And literally, I also picked up some objects that made sense to me, that kind of connected in my head with the story, and Said was totally fine with that, and he was like, yeah, so it really became like a fun collaborative thing. I was thinking I can just quickly share my screen and share some images of the exhibition if anyone would be, for people who've not really had a chance to visit. Just give me a second. Can you see my screen? Sage, can you see my screen?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is the exhibition space. We totally transformed it. We painted the walls blue. And I think colors are also something that is really sort of really seminal to this exhibition, because we've got this deep blue on the walls. We've got the color of earth. We've got gold. We've got red, and all with like different associations. This is the panel that we finally chose from the museum's collection. So we let go of the idea of using any of the actual objects, because that would have created a little bit of an issue, because we didn't plan to label anything. And the whole idea was to do this mixing of fact and fiction, but we weren't sure how it would work, within the museum and all of that. So finally, we settled for this one panel, which was actually, it's an artist's impression, which supplemented the museum's ancient history display of hand axes and stone tools. Now, if you look at it, it's quite interesting, because it's a complete fictionalized sort of vision, but it was part because it also is educative in a way, because it's showing the evolution of man. One is holding boulders, one has sharpened stone tools, so like the development of the mind or something. And this panel, we begin the show with this panel. So as you enter, you begin it with this panel, and it's very interesting because audiences from all over, and I'm not talking about people who are sort of well versed with art or anything, but when they look at this panel, things make sense to them, because we call it ancestors, and in Hindi Purvaj. So they're like, acha, haan, Purvaj is, and then things sort of make sense in the context of the show. So this is what we began with. It's quite interesting because it's that whole fiction that extends around the show. There are these drawings from the Book of Missing Pages, which we featured. Even the little vitrine that you see at the bottom is interesting, because it came up very impromptu while we were setting up, because I'll just go forward and show you something. So these were the objects from the Kochi Biennale, mostly from the Kochi Biennale that we took. But along with these were also those smaller objects you saw in the vitrine. And while setting it up, even our guards were getting really worried, because it's a museum, it's crowded, there are all kinds of people who come, people touch, we are constantly telling people not to touch, and things like that. And so we were worried that people could actually pick up those things, or very, very small objects. So out of that consideration, we started putting them in this vitrine, and a whole sort of miniature dig site sort of emerged. So yeah, that's this was also something very playfully. We took a fiberglass, this head, that bison-looking head that Sage had made, and we took one of the drawings from the Book of Missing Pages and just sort of matched it. So it also speaks about that whole idea of connecting objects with things to sort of build the story. So I feel it worked really, really well with the museum. I'll just go forward just to show you some of the images. These were the vitrines that I was talking about. So for instance, for this painting, we picked up this object. Sage got this one because we were like, okay, maybe like a mother goddess thing. Then this fur he gave me, I put it, and to me it made sense, because it was also very like Joseph, like Boysian, like Joseph Beuys, the fur, but also of shelter and the whole feminine thing. So, but different people can like kind of put different objects together, and it would still make sense as their own narratives. So it's really about, people's own sort of stories and narratives that are there in your head and beliefs. So I guess, yeah, I'll just move forward. these were some of the black sculptures. These are all site specific that were made for the exhibition, and Sage is going to dismantle them after. These are, again, if you see the mask, we have lots of interesting comments. Some say it looks like a Mickey Mouse or pretzels or death masks or, so we have all these kind of reactions from people. These were, again, we took some of the smaller objects and put some of the drawings to kind of make this display. This is another one of the black objects where he uses discarded like furniture and discarded objects that kind of form these platforms, creatures. This is from a performance, like Vivan was saying, Sage has immense amount of energy and is just up for a lot of mischief in the gallery. So we did this performance by Sahej and one of his friends, and Niyati, who's a singer, Niyati Upadhyay, and she was singing from the back, and Sahej, like some very classical sounds, but not exactly words. And Sahej was doing this performance around and reading stories. I just included this to show you the sort of real reaction that we've had from all kinds of like school groups, students, all visitors. This little girl playing with the AI projection. And this was just to show you the context of the museum. So, you can kind of see how the display also kind of resonates with the museum. So, yeah, I think that's it. So, stop sharing now. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say about the show. I mean, there's many things, but probably end here. And yeah, and the last thing is that we actually have a sample of our catalog, which we are going to be launching very soon. And the way that we've done the catalog is also to beyond the essays that feature in it, we also wanted to sort of bring out real visual stories, because Sahej's work has all these, it works in multiples. There's no singular object or singular painting or sculpture. It sort of works with this idea of accumulation through the past and all of that. So, so that's how I was very sure that we needed to focus on textures. That would be one story. We needed to focus on the different sorts of heads that he makes, which are, look prehistoric to science fiction-y, like Darth Vader-ish heads, all kinds of things. So that's how we designed it, just to give you a little bit of a thing. This was one of the sculptures that's in the atrium staircase. It's also the first time that we've used the atrium staircase to exhibit. Yeah, and this is what I meant about the heads. But yeah, and it has the stories that Sahej has written. It has essays by Vivan Sundaram, and also we invited Jason Mohakeg, who is also another mentor to Sahej through his recent preoccupations on the idea of the future and the digital and things like that. So he's written a fantastic sort of piece. Jason is the associate professor of comparative literature in Babson College. And we also have a writing piece from Mortimer. So yeah, so thank you all so much. If there's anything else you want to say, Vivan, and then if anyone has any questions also, we'd be happy to, or comments.
It was a pleasure to see the exhibition with very good projections and slides. And I think that that relationship between chaos and then finally settling into a kind of order, you can see that happening. And then again, it sort of returns to some of his, madness and like this big long figure with a big foot coming out. So I think that humor, but also very much the physicality of these objects, resonate with multiple levels of meaning. I mean, the obvious are archaeological and prehistoric, but also, to different aspects of contemporary art. The expressionist sculptures that became very popular, about 20 years ago, very wild things. And I think that the museum in this hall, in the Jahangir Nicholson Hall, they work well. But there was an idea that I think you wanted to explore, that how could some of these actually enter the museum itself. And I don't know whether they are there or that was bypassed, next to wherever, the prehistoric works are, or other about, fauna of different, that if they were there, what would happen if the visitors who come suddenly, literally, find one of Sahaj's things, next to those vitrines. So you did bring them up to the White Cube, but if that sculpture went down, to the museum, into the real public space, what would happen? So that's just a question I have.
So that was definitely something that we had considered. But unfortunately, the ancient history section where we wanted to put a piece was closed because through the pandemic and through the closure of the museum, there were several renovations that were being carried on in the museum. Also because in the run up to the centenary year. And the ancient history section is completely being redone.
Okay.
And we're quite looking forward to that because I think Mr. Mukherjee has got like different international museums also involved in sort of conceiving of that display. In fact, he was quite excited about seeing it, and he said maybe when we do it, one section of it, like the end of the ancient history section, could have Sahaj's work, which would be fantastic, and that's something that we would definitely explore. Like the ancient history section with all the objects ending with Sahaj. So it was actually just unfortunate circumstances because the place was kind of closed, and so most of the museum, a lot of parts were closed at that time. And in the natural history section, there was already another sort of display that was there. So we really tried to put it in different places, but we then sort of said that even this sort of really worked. And what's interesting is from the comments, we realized people actually see it as an extension also. Like a lot of people from the comments, we realized they're like, have also said that, oh, it really works well, or it's an extension of the museum, or they've said things like very well preserved objects, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing that happens in exhibition making. There's a lot of external factors, but then yeah, but I think it's kind of made quite an impact.
I just wanted to add to that. Sorry, Vivan, what are you saying?
Just to say that the word post, can be very much applied. So whether you call it part 2 or post, so people will be waiting for it. And I think it's exciting that Mukherjee has, kind of offered this extension to you. So you will be still hanging around the museum.
So our first visitor to the show was Mr. Mukherjee, who came one day before we opened the show, and he called me out. And I was wondering because it is something that was very different, that it has, like, the museum is not used to seeing. So I was a bit apprehensive, but he called me out and he asked me a few questions. So I told him about Inamgarh, and he has an archaeology background himself. But he immediately sort of got it. And what he said to me, he said that, if any person who is sensitive enters this space, that person will be totally blown away by the exhibition. It made that much of an impact on him, which was quite interesting to see, because obviously Mr. Mukherjee is more within the museum practice. Like, this is a lot of play. Sahej's work has a lot of play, and a lot of archaeologists could have issues with it. I know that because a lot of people do ask questions like that, like what is the theory that he's trying to prove, or like, so I think, that was something that was really, really nice to hear and see. But yeah, go on, Sahej, you were saying something.
Yeah, thanks. I actually just wanted to add a couple of things. So, right from the install, it sort of became this game that, Pooja and I were playing where, also because of the role that Pooja has as this, literally the custodian of history in this historic museum. And I was kind of becoming this agent of chaos that's kind of throwing literally everything. Coupled with the fact that I'm Punjabi, I'm just bringing everything into that space. And then it became a way for us to kind of play this game between us and navigate these bits and pieces that are pretending to be from, a time that they don't belong to. And then that game kind of extended to pretty much everyone, the audience that came in was bringing the museum in with them. In fact, the sort of most kind of excited sort of responses that I was getting were from archaeologists and and kids. And, that kind of breadth is it became really fun because, both of them were kind of bringing a sense of, wonder in a way. And this is something that even Mr. Mukherjee kind of said that there's a sense of wonder to the work, which I was really excited about. Even people from the Deccan College where I was sort of doing the research came and had a look at the work, and they too kind of responded to it in this way because the thing about Inam Gaon, the sort of historical site where this is sort of situated, the story is kind of premised on, and largely the history that it kind of looks at, RPG history, which even Tony Joseph kind of very kind of with verified data sort of reiterated is the fact that as a civilization, we are mixed. We have been 2 different kinds of people or 10 different kinds of people living together on the same piece of land, and this kind of came across constantly. You saw this even in fact so every time I would wander into the museum, and just being really nondescript, and with my haversack on or whatever, and then there's people who are very kind of overtly also right wing or whatever, looking at the work, and then they get it, the fact that yeah, okay, it was just 2 different cultures, and that became really fun in terms of people kind of being open to the idea that it's all kind of made up. The history at large has been kind of put together through it's not solid, and it's always up for grabs. That became really, that was one of the most exciting sort of responses I got, in terms of where I won't get into too much, but then and on the other side of it, children really kind of took to the work, in terms of the fact that there's so much, on one side, there are these kind of dead objects, there's this kind of overtones of death and burial in the work, and the fact that children were comfortable with that, they were okay with the fact that yes, this is just a transition between maybe this world and the next, and the fact that this is also the kind of larger sort of fabric of the world we occupy today, that things change, things sort of come to a pass, but that doesn't mean that that's not some sort of nihilistic approach to being in the world. We make do with what we have, we tell stories in the time that we have, and we share our space with the people that we have in the time that we have. The fact that this was being echoed by people who don't, we don't speak the same language, we've had completely different conceptions of what's unfolding around us, was actually quite gave me a lot of hope, that I mean, this is not some solid kind of thing that we're just kind of stuck with. And then that game just kind of like became, extended through Jason's text, which is like really, really, so the exciting thing about Jason is like, he's a really good like narrator, like he's he just had a daughter. So I asked him if he'd be okay with, doing a recording of his text. And then I made that into a film, like a little video with the work. And, it sort of like reframes the work in an entirely different sort of tone. He brings like, sort of these 1,000 sort of ways in which the world can encounter an apocalypse. And what does it mean to be a misdescendant? What does it mean to be descended from a lineage that you don't really have rightful claim over, and then shift the game of history on those grounds? So it was great to kind of have him expand the work in that way. And other than that, like, Pooja and Tamara have been kind of doing these fantastic sort of programs around the show where, viewers in the audience have been kind of like writing their own versions of the stories. Like, this not only became a way for people to understand how labels in museums work, like, how objects are framed, how history at large is framed, but then also reframe the work and create narratives with them. Like, like the sort of, I mean, they're toys for me, these things that I've created. And it became a way that like we could all kind of play with them. And that was kind of like the sort of the tasir of the like, the sort of shape of the show, that it was this game that we were all playing. And it was really exciting in that way. I mean, just that. Thanks.
No, thank you. No, it's true. Actually, the labels thing came out of the fact that we didn't put any labels. And for the first week, I had a lot of questions like, okay, but there are no labels in the show. So I said, let's just do an activity. And now we kept it open all the time, like all weekends, where people can come and write their own labels. And I didn't know there'd be so much excitement for it. There were people actually like coming in the museum and they heard about this and they were like, where can we come and write for the museum, the labels? And the sort of stories that have come out of Sahej's work, I think has been quite fun and exciting for Sahej also. Just the sort of things that people have come up with. So yeah, I think this show, I think, has really sort of made everyone an artist. It's helped me get back into like really getting into the, like the making of the work in a way. Which I feel has extended beyond to all the visitors also. So I think it's been quite special. So some of the most interesting programs that we also did were with, we invited Ranjit Hoskote to do a poetry reading, like respond through poetry to the show. Sahej did this performance, we did this label making thing, we did quiz on science fiction and archaeology. We got students to write their stories. We got students to make a time capsule of their present or what they'd want in the past. And it's quite interesting because some of them have said, we want to actually make something to confuse our successors. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot of like very, very interesting things that have come out from this exhibition. Tony Joseph's talk, which was fascinating because his book is also quite fascinating. Like Sahej said, in the end, it's kind of breaking all notions of everything that people sort of took for granted. Like one of the researches that he quotes is about how, until a few years ago, Neanderthals were considered sort of an inferior species. Like, you say you're a Neanderthal like that, and not at all connected to humans at all. But then there was some fossil that was recently found in the last few years, which shows that all non-Africans have 2% DNA of Neanderthal, like 2% Neanderthal DNA. So at some point that, there's a whole thing of the migrations out of Africa, but they did interbreed, like we did interbreed with Neanderthals. So I'm just saying it's quite interesting, the sort of things that came out of it, also the factual things, the explorations that we have done through this exhibition. And yeah, like now we are going to be closing it on the 8th. So whoever can come and see it, not seen it, please do. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say. If there's any other comments or questions, we'd be happy to take. Otherwise, we can maybe close. You want to say something, Sid?
No, I'm all right. I think like if people just wanna have any questions or like yeah, feel free to just unmute and jump in, and or we can. I think Sabi has a question. Can you unmute Sabi?
Yeah, one sec. I'm just gonna try and do that. Where are you? Can you try unmuting yourself now, Sabi? One sec. Yeah, can you try unmuting yourself?
Hi, I think it's worked.
Yeah, okay, hi.
Congratulations, Saj, and congratulations, Pooja. Just a slightly maybe provocative question, which is to say that history is a construct corroborated by various disciplines, technologies, and techniques that include archaeology, museology, writing, citation, author, all of these things, is somewhat stating the obvious. I mean, that's to begin with. And so to kind of demonstrate that it's a construct through kind of bringing in some chaos to that system and kind of leaving Easter eggs or something for people to find out that, oh, this is not really a historical, an ancient artifact, it's a contemporary artifact, and destabilizing that. Like, to me, it's that's stating the obvious. What beyond that? Because we know that based on this construct, all kinds of ideologies get mobilized. I mean, we're seeing that with the right wing right now. They're disavowing. I mean, on the one hand, on one end of the spectrum, you have decolonization that is disavowing those technologies and techniques because of the kind of violence that civilizational narratives have brought. And on the other hand, you can see an extreme religious nationalism doing the same thing, that by saying that no, all of those historical myths, so to speak, are lies, and actually we know the true history, which is in this book or that story. So yeah, like, what more than stating the obvious that that history is a construct, and that the museological apparatus is, in fact, very easy to perforate. So what does the artifact for you do then, is my question. Beyond this.
I mean, it's not really about novelty, like, it's art really about novelty in terms of, and if it is, then like, I mean, I'm really interested in like the old set in stone ways of like kind of like working with clay and saying that like, history is just this made up story that we tell ourselves, like all the other stories, like, I'm not really interested in novelty for its own sake. Because that's a bit like.
Yeah. No, so yeah, I was just curious, like, what do you want the artifact to do beyond saying that the history is a construct?
The artifact itself, I'm sorry, it sort of becomes this object that can, tell stories, essentially, like, carry stories within it, and allow it to then, in subversive ways, tell stories that counteract the narratives that have been set in stone, that, sort of like threaten to take the shape of reality if such a thing is possible. And like, I mean, this is like, I don't think I'm doing something new in that sense. Like, this is like, been happening ever since the first kind of cave painting was made. And if not, like, I mean, then like the painting that was made on top of that. And that's kind of the gesture. It is that all of this is up for grabs, essentially. And that kind of happened also in a way that the way these objects sort of occupied that space, it became this game as opposed to this story that we're telling ourselves. Like, and I think there it became more mobile. As opposed to set in stone, sort of like verified and like catalogued in that way. And yeah, that was the gesture, but it wasn't a novel one for sure. Like, I mean, that 100%. Stating the obvious for sure.
So if I can.
And Pooja, what do you think it does for you? What does this practice do to
Yeah,
artifacts per se?
Let me just jump in. So I was saying that when you say stating the obvious, who is it obvious to also, I feel? Like, I think that the exhibition works because it's in the museum. You're right. I'm not sure if in a gallery space where because there are so many people, that's where it works for me, is when I'm talking to like science students, to kids, to people who have no idea of art, to whatever, like people who have different ideas, conceptions of history themselves. I think that's where the exhibition really, really sort of works. The other thing, what it did for me, how I really connected to this body of works of the artifact that you talk about. One is that it's imagining it's imagining a future through the artifact. So there are all these meanings within those artifacts. And the other thing that it does is, because there's this accumulation of objects, there are just so many artifacts. There's this great sense of futility in a way that comes across, and somehow that sort of makes you, I don't know, it made me think about like what the artifacts and together what they're doing is really come to a question of ethics in what we take from history. Not just like, yeah, okay, history is a construct, but I feel like there's almost like a science fiction novel or a film. There's almost like a kind of moral reading. There's a conclusion that it's trying to point to. This larger truth about civilization that it's trying to point to. And yeah, nothing is like everything that way could be stating the obvious, like, but the point is for who, for who is this art, I feel. So I think that's where it really, really works for me. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, Savi.
Thank you.
Great question. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Can I ask a question as well?
Yes.
Museum is a hugely public space. It's right in the very center of Bombay. And as you said, it has a vast audience. And that's its unique thing. And that's what we were pushing Syed to really occupy it. When you use the word ancestors, we know that people are talking and defining who are our ancestors and naming them. And were there then people who said that this is insulting our ancestors, this is some joke, this is ahistorical or anti-mythologic, all those things? Were there people who were shocked by it and then said that you are denying what is our civilization, the dominant civilization? Is it a subversion of that?
Can I respond to that one also? So one of the comments that we got was like, from someone who was right wing, I guess, like, where they actually said like, confusing exhibition, whatever, and then kind of just wrote a bunch of like hashtags, so they kind of treated the comment book as like the YouTube comment thread where it was a hashtag, bunch of people and all, and then like I mean, sort of like right-wing leaders, and then uske baad, like after that, like, so it's like, Yogi Adityanath and like, Modi ji and everything. And then it actually had Pankaj Tripathi in there as well, which I thought was quite funny because like, I mean, Pankaj Tripathi is an actor, right? Like, he plays like, kind of these right-wing godman type figures, but I'm pretty sure he's not right-wing, like he's just kind of, in fact, he's playing like the villain in a lot of these films. So that kind of became this funny thing where, someone's been kind of parsing information that they're receiving in a certain way and kind of, framing a version of or a worldview, let's say. And kind of like that's where that comment came from. But then it has been informed by like, history, myths, and like pop culture just in a different way, as has this show, right? Like, but it's just like, almost like a mirror image of the whole thing. And yeah, that did happen. People were like, I mean, people were saying that like, why aren't the objects named? Because like a lot of them thought that they are their actual bones and things like that. Like, they still touch them. Like, I mean, they still kind of like touch every object and then like say, oh, but wait, are these real bones? In fact, the best way of like me kind of getting people to not do that was, nahi zinda ho jayega, like, and people just be like, oh my God. And that happened like a bunch of times with like adults as well. So it was funny. But yeah, more than that, it was really this, it was kind of fun because like we were getting these responses about like, yeah, we'd like to know what the what the cataloging details of these things are. And then kind of saying that, okay, yes, like, I mean, it's all up for grabs and like history is this kind of malleable thing. At the same time, like, in fact, that kind of became this kind of this frenzy that the show was kind of putting people into was kind of fun. Like, it was kind of provoking people's imagination, and that's essentially what I set out to do. I mean, like any storyteller, I guess. Yeah.
So I think the work is kind of transformative in the sense that once people realize that you are not telling them something, you're not teaching them something, rather you're inviting them to look at these objects. And when people ask me कि ये क्या बना है, then I'm like, आपको क्या लगता है क्या बना है? And then it just opens up a whole different sort of conversation. So I feel like it does that too, like, because you enter all these gallery spaces. And I feel like we want to come to your question. The most interesting comments we've had is not from artists or curators or art historians, like not that, but really people. And I feel like that's where the strength of the exhibition is. It's really from people, because once they realize that, okay, it's not something that is being taught to you and told to you that this is how to look at it, this is the right way to look at it, that's where the whole magic happens. I mean, that's where everyone sort of becomes more sort of looking into the work and kind of trying to make their own things from it. So I think that's where it happens. So we've had very, very interesting comments, like people writing their own stories about what it could be. Also, we have comments like long things about how amazing it is. And right under that, there's also someone who's written bakwas. So, it is that. I mean, it's kind of getting a lot of these very, very varied responses. At the same time, there's people who are just blown away by the sort of visual presentation of it. A lot of people sort of take photos with the skeleton, like people on a lie down floor, because it has all that, about talking about life through death in a way. So yeah, I feel like it is transformative. I feel the exhibition.
Pooja, I think John has Jones John in the group. He has a question. Can we unmute him?
Yeah. 1 second.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
It's not more of it's a comment more than a question. And I haven't had the pleasure to cast the exhibition. I'm so sorry. But just the idea of like what you guys are trying to do, especially in a space like the CSMVS. I feel like there's a lot of things that's taken for granted, and the amount of play that is there in like feels like either archaeology or historiography. Like that really has to come to the forefront, not in contemporary art spaces, not in white cubes, but rather in spaces of public interest, spaces that do talk about history. Like, I mean, Sahaj kind of has his own like historiography going through his entire body of work. And there's a play in that. And the play is quite comparable to like, not probably in the depth as like the guys at Deccan College go to, but it's still comparable in terms of how you kind of excavate like this other world. And the fact that that is very much a parallel to like what kind of like goes around, I think there is something to note over there, and just something to like emphasize when we take certain points of history for granted too much. I guess. I mean, for me, like I've got this talk and the last one with Tony Joseph, and I think that's something that really like comes forward. Like there's like a certain like play in history.
Thanks, Jones. Like, I mean, we've all also like kind of spoken before and everything. I mean, like, on one level, honestly, yes, there is the context of the museum and like, things sort of change because of the museum. But if I'm like brutally honest, dude, like, I'm not doing anything different than what I was doing, on the street, like during the performances back in like 2011 in the gallery and now in the museum. Or even on the internet for that matter, like with these AI programs, things like that. And let's be really honest, like, as artists, we are kind of just making things up, right? Like we are like, we're telling stories where this is all made up, the moment we kind of, start taking that a little too seriously in terms of like, that's one thing that like, we also got because of the, sorry, the linguistic turn and things that happened, with like relational aesthetics and things like that. Like, I think artists have started taking themselves way too seriously about, we're kind of becoming these didacts who are like, kind of presenting culture to people. No, I mean, art, like, like right from the first kind of cave paintings till like, inshallah, like, into the future, artists will be making things up and like, I mean, I think the world will be a lot easier place to kind of navigate if we don't take ourselves that seriously, because like we know how that turned out. I mean, history is witness. Like, there's a, I mean, it's tragic, but there's a poet behind every genocide, right? Like, and yeah, like, I mean, that space of fun, that space of play, in a really serious sense as well. I mean, made prosper,
Of course, yes. No, I'm just like thinking about the fact that if anything, the last like 30 or 40 years of like historiography has really taught us is that like, a lot of like assumptions can go out of, assumptions come, assumptions go. Like, I mean, every new piece of history kind of like gives you something new to think about. And in that context, like, I mean, yes, you have been doing this in like several contexts, the galleries, the biennales. But the second you bring to a context where like, historical objects are shown as well, you kind of like bring that other aspect of historical objects also into the playing field. That an object can mean one thing right now, it can mean something 10 years from now, it can mean something 10 to 20 years from now. Like, and that's something that I was thinking about through this talk and the last one as well. Like, I mean, it's a subjective opinion coming from someone who hasn't seen the show yet, but just on like a conceptual level, something I was thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, like time will change things, 100%. It should, right? Like, I mean, God forbid any of this is that all the kind of ramblings that I've put together, and even in the book missing pages and things like that, is set in stone. I mean, like, I wouldn't want that to happen for sure. Yeah, like, I mean, that it is this game, right? Like, I mean, like art is this game that we're kind of playing with, it's sort of like multi-level chess. Everyone makes a move and then the board changes, and then like, and in a larger kind of sense, that is the game that we are playing. Like, like how Tony kind of points out, with verified sort of genetic data, which is quite funny because, usually genetic data is kind of used to sort of valorize one kind of idea of purity and race. Like essentially what he's saying is the notion of race itself is, a construct. Like, there's no idea of pure race that you can pinpoint and like kind of, say that, categorize in that way. And like every kind of ensuing narrative that came out of that is just, a fairy tale. So yeah, like, I mean, we need these ways, like, I mean, there's this Sufi idea that like, what it says is that like, I mean, this was like, kind of practiced by the order of assassins. So Hassan-e-Sabah, like, the old man in the mountain, the sort of leader of the assassins, would say that all is, sorry, my iPad's on 5% battery, so it might die out. I'll try to say this really quickly and then put a charger in. He says, all is permitted because all is illusion, right? And the fact that all is illusion, all is constructed in this way, is something that is the kind of responsibility of the storyteller, to remind people that, hey, this is just a story, this is not something that's set in stone. This is not something that you can take for granted in that sense. Yeah, now I'm gonna go put the charger in, and I'll still be online, but I'm gonna turn my screen off. So yeah.
And I think I'm done with my comment as well. So handing it back to you.
Pooja, can I come in again? Sorry.
Yes, of course.
Losing my
Please do.
long connection with Sahaj,
Yes.
and that finally your exhibition is a very beautifully designed show. It becomes a museum show, and I'm for it, but I'm flipping the coin and saying that suppose all this was conceived as being in a storeroom, and I'm sure there are lots of work that Sahaj has, so that there would be broken pieces and things, and that the storeroom, has spooky corners and all that. So the storeroom also then, connects with the concept of the ruin. And that's a fascinating concept which people enter. Ruin pushes it into history, and there's so much written about the ruin. So that if this whole show was kind of phenomenologically constructed as a ruin, then if I can say, that would come closer to my notion of installation art, whereas this is a very finely displayed one, and the different positions in it, the viewer, it's a museum. I'm not saying that it could be done, but if one just projects an idea that the same work, is in a store, it was all lost and it was found, things were broken, and what would be the aura of that work and of the work and the total space, and that it's a ruin, and that would you come away with melancholy or that you would try to reconstruct this ruin?
I think that's a very sort of interesting idea for sure. In fact, while we were doing this show, also it took us into the real depths of the museum. We had gone into a lot of the storage spaces, which was which looks so much like part of the installation, which as you enter Sage's exhibition, there are these the slot angle shelves, which is what the museum also uses in their store, but it's like a whole array of things. There's like stuffed heads, there's all kinds of objects that are, all put together. But yeah, you're right. Like it is something that could be extended further. But of course, at the museum, it's also a little bit that you have to think about how the audiences, or how we kind of then really sort of crystallize that for the museum. But yeah, it's a very interesting idea. I know that like your the trash work has that real sense of you know of just a space which probably like a more neglected sort of space. That's what comes out of a forgotten store or a ruin. So definitely that's a thought for sure. But Sahej, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, we were actually thinking of like the museum storage in that sense. It was kind of like almost bringing that in that it's sort of this cross between being a museum or a excavation site storage. Like, these are the kind of ways in which things are displayed even at the Deccan College, where all the objects from Inamgaon are sort of displayed, on these like kind of metal tables, and some objects are like, now that they've been catalogued, they're in vitrines, and the ones that haven't been like kind of catalogued into, the sort of corridors of history are still like on the shelves. There's that sort of in-between space where you kind of see history being made in a certain way. And we wanted to kind of bring that in, that was something that was playing in my mind, that like, at what point does like a thing go from like just being on a shelf or like in the corner to becoming, this sort of rarefied object. So that's the space that the kind of installation sort of occupied. And as far as like kind of turning it into a ruin, I'm actually doing that. So what I've been doing secretly is well, okay, not so secretly, is like 3D scanning the sculptures and kind of putting them into this kind of virtual sort of environment that people can like navigate, and like I'll turn it into some sort of a video game that you can kind of like move around in. I'll also at some point, once I get like the models cleaned up and everything, put these out for free. Some of the 3D models are just going to be uploaded by the only rule of the internet, which is like, because the internet's free, things like files should be free, should be easily shareable. Under CC0, in fact, there's already a few sculptures online, if you can find them, that you can download and remix. Please don't make an NFT out of it. That's just arson. Yeah, like, I mean, the world that we kind of set forth is going to sort of permeate online and in other spaces. Yeah. Sorry, was there another question? Yeah, so in the chat, there was actually a question about the materials. I'm just going to go back to that. Roshan had asked. So thanks, Roshan. So actually, the idea behind like even painting the objects in these kind of 4 colors. So you have red for flesh, black for oil, and you have these kind of precious metals, gold, and you have earth. There's like very 4 kind of elements that put the show together, and it became this game. Like, it literally like, you have 4 colors in Ludo, for example, like, that you can kind of now start toying with and like move each pawn in a certain way, and that's what people were doing. Like, that's where the kind of materiality of these things came from. And on another level, they're also like, nothing in the show is saying what it is. It is pretending to be something that is not. Like, you have plastic pretending to be petroleum. You have plaster pretending to be ancient terracotta, and you have this AI program that is pretending to be sentient. So there's this game of pretend that's being played out, and yeah, that was kind of like where the sort of these objects kind of play with that idea of their realness, their sort of visceral materiality in that way. They sort of pretend to be what they're not, and actually archaeologists have a word for this as well. Like, so say, for example, if they would find things in a layer of soil cover, where, and when they date the object, it belongs to another, somewhere else, like in the sense it might be from further back into the past, like, or like, might be much newer. So archaeologists describe this occurrence as a terminus post quem. So that basically means it's a fancy way of saying we don't know where this is from. How did this get here? And that's kind of what the show is sort of doing. Like, it's trying to bring, like, prehistory into this place of not knowing. Like, in fact, if you just hold on, like, I have this thing on top of my, like, yeah, I just like hang it over my bed. So this is actually from the museum. It's a souvenir. If you can see it, the camera's over there. It's the Harappan seal with the, some people call it a unicorn. It's probably a bull, whatever it is, Now, the thing about this image, like, is that everyone who has kind of like had anything to do with this piece of land that we call the Indian subcontinent has their history shared in this object, right? But we don't know what the script means. We don't know what this animal is. We don't know what purpose this thing served, and that is the kind of sort of adbhut kind of surprise of our origins that this object kind of tells us that, like, we all share this history with this land, the fact that, like, we belong here, we have passed through here. But what binds us, like our origins, are always going to be locked away, even though, like, now you have like AI that is claiming to decipher the code, like Google is sort of working on it. And even if that script is broken in the end, like, that doesn't change the fact that, like, our origins largely will forever be, shrouded in mists of history. But then we belong, and we belong in the now with each other, like we can cohabit. That was kind of what and you don't really need a reason for this, to kind of stand with people next to you. You don't need a flag that'll bind you together. You just need the fact that, like, we don't know where we came from, and that in itself, tells us that, like, our origins. What can be more shared than that? The fact that, like, we don't know where we came from. Like you and I, we're brothers of an unknown past, and sisters and siblings. Yeah, that was kind of the whole point of the show, and like of everything that I do. So, sorry, it's not novel and all that, but yeah. Anyway, cheers.
Maybe one last question and then maybe we can wrap up. Someone's again asked about why labels were not used. Was it to change the atmosphere? So we discussed this before in the talk. I think it was to sort of make the act of creating meaning, to kind of spread it around and get the audience to also be the creators of meaning in the show, and not to be just the tellers of meaning. So I think that was what it was. And it also kind of works together as almost like a stage set. So that's why we didn't put any labels in the show. So yeah, I think Vivaan, unless you want to say something, no, we can probably wrap up. Mort, thank you so much for being here. I know Mort is actually in quite a bad way, I know, but he's been there for the whole talks. Thank you so much for being there. And thank you, Vivaan. Thanks for your work.
And for Seher, it's lovely to be here on this last few days, and all the best for the rest.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an absolute honor, and thank you everyone for joining us. This was